Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everybody to another webinar of the Proposition 123 Draft County Methodology webinar. Just a few kind of housekeeping elements. We are recording this meeting. And please feel free to drop any questions or suggestions in the chat. We have folks managing the chat throughout the webinar. If you could hold question and answer for certain specific points throughout the webinar and at the end, we'll have little stoplights at the bottom of certain slides, and we'll pause to have some discussion at strategic points throughout the webinar. And we'll also open for some discussion at the end of the webinar. I think we have plenty of time at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ashley to do some introductions of the webinar.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you. Good morning to everyone for joining us today. We're extremely excited to have you here and to learn more about this work. And so for those of you who don't know, my name's Ashley Wiesner. I'm the Proposition 123 Community Support Manager here with DOH. And again, just welcoming you all here today as we review and discuss the important work being done to address goals of Prop 123 in increasing the number of affordable unit counts and the implementation of an expedited review or fast track process. So first, I wanted to mention a couple of items that was sent out via email, but I believe it's also pinned in the chat. So we have the drafted unit count methodology. We also have a Google form that we created and are leaving open throughout this month. We'll close that on March 31st. I know this is the first time that a lot of you are seeing this document, and so we just wanted to give you all the opportunity, one, to participate in this webinar, and then to sit with the document, provide feedback, or if there's any areas of substantial confusion, we wanted you to be able to utilize that form so that at the end of the month, we can take that all in and review it and see how we can incorporate that into either the framework being proposed or into an FAQ, or if we need to meet with you all one-on-one to talk about that situation uniquely, we're happy to do that as well. So please utilize that form. It'll be open again, as I said, until March 31st. So before I turn it back over to our friends at Logan Simpson and Western Spaces, I did want to highlight the work that's being done to get us where we are today in developing the methodology and ensuring compliance with statute outlined in HB 23-1304. So as our community support team came together late summer of 2024, one of our main goals was to launch this material for clarity and guidance as you work towards counting Prop 123 units and implementing Fast Track. We were able to secure the Logan Simpson team to help facilitate and support this effort. So first and foremost, I wanted to thank them for the dedication and work fitting towards this project. I also wanted to introduce a few key members of our team here at DOLA that's on the call today. So we have Robin DeFalco. I know many of you probably already are familiar with her work and her team and the efforts being done with the local planning capacity grant program. We also have Dean Myron, who's our community support specialist, and Becky Brazel, who's our other community support specialist. And I do want to introduce Andrew. He is week one into his role here at DOH. He is our program coordinator. So Dean, Becky, and Andrew will really be, and myself will be your key points of contact moving forward when you have questions on unit counting, anything related to Prop 123 in this efforts. I wanted you to know that we exist and put faces to our names. We also have Laurel Varnell. She is coming into this work. Our team is housed within the Office of Housing Recovery, and Laurel is here. She is the director. So she's been jumping into this work as well and learning all things Prop 123, and we're excited that she's here. So we have been working diligently to gather both internal and external stakeholder feedback throughout these last couple of months. We've had great constructive dialogue. Feedback and suggestions have been incorporated into the methodology as you see it today. However, please utilize that form for additional feedback throughout this month for anything else that may still be a little bit fuzzy. So more will be discussed throughout the webinar, but the final methodology guidebook, along with other supplemental materials, such as a unit count tracker template, we have high-level one-pagers for you to use for your jurisdiction, for internal staff, or for elected officials. We think those will be really helpful for you all and tools to use as you communicate what's going to be required. And you'll also be notified via the DOH newsletter on key updates related to this work. And you can always reach out to a member of our team. And if you haven't signed up for those newsletters, I do encourage you to do so, as that will be kind of a key line of communication for you all. So if there's nothing else from me, that is what I have for my little intro, and I will toss it back over to Jen.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashley.
Yep.
So for today, as Ashley mentioned, we're going to go over Proposition 123 background and understanding the program requirements, housing categories and milestones, special circumstances, and then what goes into your submission package. I do want to highlight, like Ashley said, what we have prepared, what's out there currently is an initial draft of guidance on unit counting. And we're always open to more suggestions, like she said. If any further suggestions come out of this webinar, or as you're reviewing the documentation, you say, oh, it would just really help me to have a little more clarity on X, Y, and Z, please use those forms and this forum to let us know what else we may be missing. So a little background, I'm sure everyone's on this call because you're familiar with Proposition 123, probably filed a commitment last year and are working through your unit counting. But just as a reminder to those of you who may be new to the program, the Proposition 123 was approved by voters of the state in November of 2022. And it defines housing affordability thresholds with rental housing being at or below 60% AMI and for sale housing at or below 100% AMI. Which contributes to your unit counting requirements. Throughout this presentation, you'll see these AMIs referenced, so we just wanted to give you that framework again for everybody's justification. Again, with the program, so when you first filed a baseline commitment or a commitment with Proposition 123, you had to calculate your baseline, filed your commitment, and as soon as you filed your commitment, you could start counting those units. So that's what we're here to talk about today is that piece at the end about how to count your units, what counts, and how to record and document those unit counts. I think that's about it. All that I want to say on this slide. Are there any specific questions just on the baseline and commitment really quickly before we move on? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah McLean from Western Spaces to go over the understanding of the program requirements.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone for being here today. We just want to get started getting everyone on the same page around the language and around some of the requirements before we dive a little deeper into each of the categories that we've broken out here. So as far as what you need to track, there are really generally four broader categories: new construction, preservation, conversion, and NOAH, which is naturally occurring affordable housing, that fall under Prop 123. With all of these categories, there's some consistency in what you're going to be looking to track. One is that it needs to be affordable under Proposition 123 thresholds. And Jen just highlighted those. That's less than 60% AMI for rental and less than or equal to 100% AMI for ownership. They also need to have an affordability mechanism, with one exception, which is the NOAH units that actually should not have an affordability mechanism on them. They should be newly constructed, converted, or preserved on or after the date that you filed your commitment. There's variation for when communities filed their commitment, so know when you filed it and you can begin counting after that date. And then they need to be counted at the appropriate milestones, and we'll discuss those a little further along as well. As far as affordability mechanisms go, the real purpose around the mechanism is that it's going to guarantee affordability for renters or owners, aligning it with the Prop 123 requirements, which is creating new affordable housing for the state of Colorado. The key requirements for an affordability mechanism is that it needs to be enforceable at the time of unit reporting, so when you're counting the unit and reporting it. It needs to specify the income limits per Prop 123 limits. It needs to include monitoring and compliance procedures, and it needs to meet the duration standards per the funding source, and we'll highlight that a little going forward as well. As far as examples for affordability mechanisms, we've pulled out just a few here. This is not an exhaustive list. Under rental mechanisms, there's a deed restriction. I think many communities are familiar with that mechanism. You could use a land use restrictive agreement, which is a LURA. For example, this could be a LIHTC funded apartment complex that has a LURA that's going to require some percent of units to be rented, up to 60% AMI or less. Regulatory agreements, for example, this could be something like a developer receives local tax incentives for building affordable housing, and in exchange, they sign an agreement with the jurisdiction that will require compliance with the income limits. And then for nonprofit or housing authority, that would guarantee affordability through their continued oversight. So the authority, for example, could purchase an apartment building and ensure that all units remain affordable within that building. And the authority itself would manage the income verification and the rent levels over time. As far as ownership units go, deed restrictions again are an option. Another option is a promissory note that would outline the affordability restrictions to the property. This could be a jurisdiction that's going to provide maybe a deferred loan to an income qualified home buyer that would set affordability requirements at resale. For a community land trust model, this could be that the trust would retain ownership of the land while selling the homes on top of the land at an affordable price. And the trust would ensure that buyers can only resell at a restricted income-based price. And then there's the limited equity cooperative that would cap resale values to preserve affordability. So this could be like residents of a cooperatively owned housing development could purchase shares in the property, but the resale values would be capped to keep the homes affordable for future buyers. So these are just some examples. It's not exhaustive, but to give you an idea of some of the tools that are out there around affordability mechanisms. Next slide, thank you. As far as the duration requirements go, they vary, and they're primarily going to be based around the funding source that's being used. There's no specific duration requirement for your affordability mechanism per Proposition 123. So the Prop 123 funds are typically about a 30-year affordability period. If there are other funding sources that are being used, like LIHTC or home funds or CDBG funds, those are going to follow their own affordability durations. And then if it's locally funded, some funding may align with state or federal programs, while other may have different terms. So it'll vary. For regional collaboration, our entire state, as well as Prop 123, recognizes that housing does not necessarily stay within jurisdictional boundaries, or that housing needs do not, recognizing that there are connections across regions in that sense. So it is encouraged to form collaborative agreements regionally to count units and to share unit production. The requirement really is that you need to have something in writing that will show the unit attribution, so which units are going to be counted to which partner. Whole units only, so not counting partial units. And then defining what the shared responsibilities may be, and then outlining a management approach for going forward. And then having some way to sort of document and track this agreement and the units produced as part of that. We do have a stoplight here. If there are any questions around sort of the higher level grounding components of this.
I have a question. Sarah, this is Chris O'Keefe from Jefferson County, and about the regional collaboration. And I think what you said was probably pretty clear, but if we are collaborating with our, let's say, the jurisdictions within our county, we cannot share a unit, right? The unit has to go to either the county or the city or whomever we're collaborating with.
Right.
We both would not get credit for the same unit, even if we're working together on it.
Right. No, that's accurate. No double counting. And then again, as I mentioned, you can't each take half a unit. There's really no way to count a half unit towards the commitment.
I thought it was clear, but I hoped maybe I misunderstood.
I'm sorry, but thank you for asking the question. Well, if we don't have any further
I
questions.
actually had one question.
Uh-huh.
This is Lauren with the City of Golden. I'm curious, so when you were talking about the rental sort of compliance options, you mentioned that if it was owned or operated by the housing authority, that was kind of like an automatic compliance option. So if we had a property that was purchased for preservation and it was operated by the county housing authority, would we need to add also a deed restriction or some mechanism like that, or them doing the compliance, is that enough?
I think as long as the housing authority itself can do that compliance and can show that that unit is meeting the requirements when you're counting it, that is sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
This is Allison with the City of Loveland, and I have a question that I've asked before, and it looks like the information is still the same. And that's on naturally occurring affordable housing. By definition, naturally occurring affordable housing is not deed restricted. Because it's naturally occurring, that means that you have people in your community who are willing and able to build a home, generally for sale, that can be sold to somebody at or below 100% of the AMI. It's naturally occurring. It's not incentivized. It's not deed restricted. It isn't a land trust. It is naturally occurring. So if you do that, you're asking to put a deed restriction on it, that means that 100% of the time, at least in our community, and I know this because I've had conversations with for-profit developers, it cannot be counted. Naturally occurring affordable housing will never be able to be counted as long as there is the requirement of a deed restriction. Initially, when this started, the goal was to have your communities get around building naturally occurring affordable housing. And now we've taken that to a point where that's not based in reality any longer, which if that's the case, then I think we say so. And what we're doing is limiting counting deed restricted homes. That removes naturally occurring affordable housing. The second part of that is that what we're finding, because we do have for-profit developers building affordable housing that is sold right now to 70% AMI folks, they can decide what is affordable to them. And I think that I love the idea of saying it's only 30%. But that also takes out the free will of the buyer. So if we have a buyer that the mortgage is now affordable and they're at 35% of their income, incredibly affordable, far more, we've seen this happen, far more affordable than what they did have, they also cannot be counted because of a very stringent guidelines. And for me, it disallows the family to say, this is a decision that I'm going into knowing everything that I know. Of course, they don't care about the 30%. And they've created we've created a program where it works for the family, but now and we're incentivizing it, and it's deed restriction, not naturally occurring, but we can't count it. Those are my comments.
Well, thank you, Allison. You're entirely correct about the naturally occurring affordable housing. It does not it actually should not have any kind of deed restriction on it. So it should be driven by the market. And if you were to put a deed restriction on it, the category would change and it would become either a preservation unit or a conversion unit, depending on how you did that. So I hope that clarifies the naturally occurring component of it. As far as the
It does if we can count it.
Yeah, you can count it without the deed restriction. It's actually to count as
Okay.
naturally occurring. It needs to not have any kind of restriction on it. And then as far as the 30% affordable goes, I believe that's defined by statute, but also the affordable purchase price and the affordable rent is defined by your AMI and by your local calculations around what that purchase price would be, what the local market is showing you as far as taxes and down payment. And so there's a little bit of flexibility within that, as long as it is affordable at the right limit, 60% rental, 100% AMI. You should show documentation, and there is a little bit of flexibility if that owner says it's affordable to them and wants to purchase it. Look for those little flexibilities in there. We're not trying to tell people what's affordable to them or not, but we do need to follow statute.
Okay, so you used a couple words, seems like might be. Are you saying go ahead and count those?
I think that documenting it and reaching out to the community support team early with that will give everyone a little chance to have some discussion back and forth.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm. Hi, Deb. I see you have your hand up.
Yep. Hi, thank you. This is a kind of a piggyback on Allison's question, but on the opposite side of the coin, the concern that I have with the naturally occurring affordable housing is that it can be subject to supply and demand at any time if it's not restricted to be sold or rented to any particular income range. I suspect that's why Greeley ended up with such a high commitment. I think our commitment's like around 200. Ashley can help me out with that, actually. It's high. And that is, there can't even, I mean, I would be shocked if we even had, 500 actual deed restricted units in town at any one moment. So I guess I'm wondering, with counting what we've helped to create isn't a problem. And like Allison said, capturing all the naturally occurring affordable, will the same tool that was used to generate the numbers to begin with be generated to update whatever that data was and wherever that came from to help with figuring out how many naturally occurring were created? And then on the other, which is a great thing if they stay that way, but Greeley is supposed to double in size in 20 years. That means supply and demand will go crazy. That means prices will go higher. And that means that housing, that naturally occurring affordable housing, will literally disappear at some point in that continuum. So how do we account for that? Hypothetical, probably not for this call. That might be a one-on-one, but that's the concern that I have with naturally occurring, is that because it's not restricted, we may actually lose numbers versus gaining numbers when we go to count.
And Sarah, if
Right,
you want, I can jump
go
in
ahead,
a little bit. I know we're jumping, we have a whole NOAA a little bit further in the presentation, but yeah, Deb, those are all great points. And I will say just the efforts that are being, and we can discuss more offline too with that situation, but what DOH has been doing, and we've had a lot of stakeholder engagements and just working with SDO and all of our other partners in tracking and trying to come to an alignment with how we're going to be counting NOAA and staying in compliance with statute. And so what we're going to be doing on our end is providing on our website is we're going to have just a a pretty comprehensive list of data resources, and we'll be working with you on those NOAA accounts to be able to, what we need to be able to do is be able to track the methodology. If you say you have X amount of NOAA, pull from all of these data sources, it may or may not be relevant to you, whether it's CoStar, MLS, or Zillow, or whatever the case may be. We're going to have a pretty good list for folks to be able to build that with, but we just need to be able to track that methodology and how you came to those NOAA unit counts, because each jurisdiction is going to look so different and so unique. So that may be a more one-on-one technical assistance session with you all regarding NOAA, but we are putting together and have that post to our website on just kind of a high-level framework of how we want to see NOAA.
Thanks for that, Ashley. Do we have further questions before the next section is the specifics around each category that you can count? So we covered sort of higher level what these categories are. For new construction, it's pretty self-explanatory. Another path is preservation and conversion. For preservation, that's going to apply to existing affordable housing that may be at risk due to an expiring affordability restriction, ownership changes, or even market pressures. These can include things like renewing expiring restrictions, acquiring at-risk properties, or adding new affordability program agreements. Rehabilitation also is under this preservation category as well. So as far as conversion goes, this is going to apply to market rate units that are newly designated as affordable, as well as any non-residential properties that are repurposed into affordable housing. Examples are office buildings or hotels or commercial spaces that are converted into residential use while maintaining some enforceable affordability restrictions. And then lastly, as we've touched on, is naturally occurring affordable housing. And this is going to be new or existing housing that remains affordable without public subsidies or any legally imposed affordability restrictions. We also have broken out some special circumstances. These will fall under the broader categories, but they have specific considerations that go with them. There's the rural resort alternative AMIs, the mobile homes and manufactured housing, group living and special needs housing, and communities that don't issue building permits. So for new construction, it counts when physical construction is allowed to begin. For those communities that use a building permit, that's going to be when the building permit is issued for vertical construction primarily. It can also, for those that have an equivalent to a building permit, it could count at that time. We recognize that every community sort of has their own way of issuing either building permits or some kind of go for doing a new housing unit. So there's some flexibility in there. It does not count as certificate of occupancy because at that point your building permit would have already been issued. For preservation and conversion, there's really two key milestones, and it falls to sort of the latter of rule. So if it needs renovation and a building permit is required, then that should be in place. If there is no building permit required, then that's not required. For the funding source, if it's standard funding, that will be at financial close. And if it's funded through Prop 123, it will be a notice of award. So if you need a building permit and you're getting funding, whichever one happens last is when you count it. Next slide, please. Thank you. And for NOAA, we've already covered this a little bit, and we recognize that every community is unique, and counting NOAA is going to be probably unique to most communities as well. There's not going to be really one-stop source that's going to be sufficient across the state of Colorado. NOAA refers to new or existing housing that remains affordable without any kind of subsidy. It should not have been counted in your baseline, so it should, be newly added housing stock, or it could be decrease in unit price. It was up and has gone down in price. It could be stable in price while incomes and AMIs are going up. So it came into that affordable range. And it should not have an affordable mechanism on it. And you just need to provide documentation that the unit is at or below the AMI thresholds at the end of the cycle. We recognize that being able to prove that the incomes of those living in that unit is something that might be very difficult for many communities to do. And we do have a stoplight here for questions if there are any.
There are some questions in the chat.
Okay.
For counting NOAA, is the income limit still 60% AMI if there is no requirement for deed restriction?
For a rental unit, yes, it is, unless you've received the rural resort exemption and that was approved, that would follow that. And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward.
I see Robin answered this one, but I'll just say it out loud anyway. Would the same methodology sources that were used to set the baseline, including NOAA, not be a suitable measure for counting new NOAA units?
Yeah, you know, we've been back and forth on if there is a consistent source to be able to count NOAA units across Colorado, and there's really not. But as Ashley mentioned, you know, it's a little bit of a please reach out. You know, we're working on this. You know, there are a variety of sources you can look at to see if it's sufficient for you.
This is Catherine from Denver. What would be an example of a NOAA preserved? They would already have existed during the baseline. Like for us, preserved means we extended a deed restriction or placed a deed restriction on something.
I believe that would be a new unit came online at or near, say its ownership 100% AMI, and you were able to put a deed restriction on that after it was NOAA, and then you would be preserving it, and that would count as preserved.
Okay, so it would not count under the NOAA. It would count under preserved.
It would count on preserved. It was originally naturally occurring. You put an affordability mechanism on it, and then it became affordable and it is preserved. And I see Robin has her hands up. She might state this more clearly.
Yeah, I think so. If the unit was previously affordable, market rate, no deed restriction, and then you put a deed restriction on it, we would call that converted to affordable. And then if it had a deed restriction that was going to fall off or expire, and you put new deed restrictions, or it was purchased by a new entity, like let's say it was formerly a LIHTC unit that was going to be sold at market rate and the local government came in and purchased it, or a new owner, that would be called preserved, right? Same thing like maybe an affordable mobile home park. So, and neither of those scenarios are counted under the NOAA. So when we're talking about NOAA, it would be a brand new unit that, you know, is a affordable to households at lower incomes. And another example of NOAA could be something like an ADU. It could be a down payment assistance program, could make that existing unit affordable to that household, right? Those are the kind of limited and special circumstances.
Okay, so anything, units that are preserved by placing a deed restriction on them would not count under the NOAA category. It can happen to a NOAA, but it's not something that we count under NOAA. The DPA, I definitely want a lot more information on that because that gets tricky. But thank you for answering the questions.
And thank you for the clarification, Robin, on preserved versus converted. Flip those around sometimes. Do we have any more questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry, I can't find the little hand raise. So it can be NOAA if it's not a new housing unit if DPA is used. Is that correct?
That would be one example. It's maybe one of the easier examples to think about, and we recognize that the documentation, it is complex, as Catherine said. So we're trying to provide good guidance on that, and because DOLA just has to have a way to verify it. That's what the law requires of DOLA, but the law also suggests that it is allowable to count those. So we're trying to find a way for everyone to be able to count.
Okay, but if there was some way to verify, which I have no idea how this would actually be possible, but let's say it is possible to find out that a household that's under 100% AMI was purchased a home without down payment assistance, like without any sort of Prop 123 or subsidy tools, but they were able to meet the affordability requirements and just do it like truly naturally. Like, would that be countable or not?
Yes, that would be countable.
Okay, but we'd have to magically find out some sort of way to find out that information.
We would just have to verify it. And I mean, we're not going to be asking for personally identifiable information or anything like that. If there's a process in place that you are following, either through your jurisdiction or a third party administrator, we would just need to have that documentation that it's being done.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
If I might just offer one other thing for local government staff to be thinking of. Let's say that a developer comes to your community with a request to build these single family homes in your community, or townhomes or condos, right? And they say, when they present to your city council, we expect that these units will be affordable at these various price points. We've got these 3-bedroom units, these 2-bedroom units, right? That's a point in time when you might be having a conversation and saying, it sounds like some of these units might count towards our Prop 123 commitment if we're issuing a building permit within this time frame. They might not get built till later, but based on the data that, the conversation we're having with the developer, it might count. So then you're going to want to look in a little more to how will we be able to verify this to the best of our ability. And that might then become a more one-on-one conversation with Ashley's team or with your developer, but that's, in theory, those units could be counted and you can identify them maybe early prior to being built.
Another interesting question in the chat. Are new mobile homes purchased by the owner moved into a mobile home park where the lot is rented considered rental or for sale for the purposes of Prop 123?
We'll cover this a little further along, but it would be considered for sale because they actually own the home. And for the affordability calculation, the lot rent would not be included in that, I believe is how we currently have it drafted right now. Ashley, I see your hands up.
Sorry, I do
Yeah.
not mean to have my hand up.
Oh,
Or is
me,
that
Ashley.
Ashley
Ashley
Chambers?
Chambers.
Oh, okay,
Different
great.
Ashley.
Sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
I think someone just commented a little bit in the, Catherine, it looks like put a similar question to what I have in the chat, but does the documentation have to be at the end, or can it be like when that unit transitions and we keep that documentation? I think, going back to what Robin was talking about, technically we count that at the building permit, which is much easier than to capture documentation at that building permit versus, at the end of a 3-year cycle when we have to reach back out to a developer, if you will. And what would that look like? Is that could it be just an affidavit then that says this is our price point and what we intend? Because that, and also then, is it based on the home price at 100% AMI or the person who buys the home price at the 100% AMI? Because we may be able to get the first, but not the last. You know what I mean? Because that is people's private information and particularly their financial information. And I can't imagine it would be very easy for us to go back to a developer and say, all right, you price point them at this point, but you have 100 people, 100 families living here. Now we need to go back and ask for all of their income verification as well. And so that I kind of two questions there, but.
I can start this, but I'll let the community support team chime in as well. As far as when you count it, if it's new construction, the requirement is that you can count new construction at building permit. So that would make sense. If you need some flexibility in that, NOAA may be able to build in a little bit of flexibility, but it would make sense to count it when the permit is issued. As far as price, what it sells at versus what the income is of the person purchasing it, we recognize that it's going to be really hard to keep track of everyone purchasing these NOAA units. So it's primarily would be based on price, unless you're able to provide that income information, that's excellent, but based on sale price. And I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in or not on that, but hopefully that answers your question, Ashley.
Thank you, yes.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can move on to the next section, which is a little highlight on some of the special circumstances. Next slide, thanks. So the areas for special consideration or special circumstances, one is rural resort communities that have successfully petitioned the Division of Housing for alternate AMI levels. Another is mobile homes and manufactured housing. We touched on that just a little briefly earlier. There's group living and special needs housing, and then there's alternative documentation for communities that don't use building permits. Really, the broader goal here is to be working with local governments across the state to help you all meet your commitments. And the bigger message, you've probably heard it already, is go ahead and reach out to the community support team, early and often if you need to work through particularly this first cycle where this is new for everyone. For the rural resort petition, if you have a petition approved, there'll be different AMI requirements. You just need to confirm that your jurisdiction has officially been approved for the adjusted AMI limits and assure that the counted units meet those adjusted AMI limits. If the project is approved or if your AMI is approved as an averaging, there can be units that are above 100 or above whatever your new threshold is and below, but just make sure that that average is going to meet the limit. For mobile homes and manufactured housing, we would ask that you confirm whether the project is part of a resident-owned cooperative, a land trust, or if there's a different affordability mechanism. So there's a couple different mechanisms that can be used for mobile homes and manufactured housing. And then also just ensure that the total housing costs meet the affordability thresholds. For group living and special needs housing, just confirming that the project is permanent housing. Temporary housing does not count, so not an emergency shelter or temporary housing. Ensure that each unit meets the U.S. Census definition of a housing unit, which is separate living quarters and having direct unit access. And then verify that each household has a lease or a formal occupancy agreement. And for alternatives to building permit issuance, just being able to confirm that a trigger has been issued that allows for physical construction to begin and that the project complies with local land use requirements. On all of these, you'll see the colored boxes on the right. Those are sort of the higher level requirements that apply to pretty much all units being counted under Prop 123. Do we have any questions at this point?
I do about mobile home parks. So I think you may have answered it before, but now that we're on that slide, you said it's land trust, ROC, and there was one more thing, or deed restricted, but then also I'm guessing these would count then if they don't fall within those categories under NOAA as well, or could.
Mhm. They could, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that is one of the largest sources of NOAA for many communities are mobile home parks. So that's important.
A question in the chat, are only rural resort communities eligible for adjusted AMI limit?
Yes, it's sort of a multi-phase process. If you're not currently designated as a rural resort county, you can become designated. You can petition to become designated. And then once you're designated, you can then petition for higher AMI limits. And that's going to require a housing needs assessment and looking at your average AMI needs for owner and renter housing.
I do have another question. As we're tracking everything, will you have some kind of, I don't know, tool that sort of says these examples that we've given? Like, I know Robin, yours was really good under NOAA, like if this, then this is like kind of the path you would take, and this is how, when you would count it, and then this is the documentation, or some examples that's kind of, you know, as these weird scenarios come up or these questions get asked, and then, you know, there's nowhere to capture it unless you go back to these recordings again. Is there a way that you guys are capturing it that will be sort of like a easy like reference tool that we can utilize as a city? Because right now, like, I'm imagining as we go down this, different units will have different things, and it would be great to be able to go back to a reference guide and sort of look, okay, we can count this. Or at the end of our 3-year, I think someone said they're going in and looking at sales prices at 100% AMI and when the building permits were pulled. You know, I just want to make sure that we're capturing it in a way that we could go through a checklist at the end of 3 years and count every possible unit. Because like someone else said in this, you know, I think it was Greeley, their numbers are exponential. We have the same issue in Grand Junction. Ours, you know, if we're going to meet our goal, that was a 256% increase in affordable housing units for our unit count, which is huge of a leap. And so I want to make sure I can count as many things as humanly possible as we go down this rabbit hole, if you will.
Yeah, Ashley, sorry, Sarah, I'm just going to jump in here and just confirm that, yes, we are working on that. We are putting together multiple helpful resources and guides and checklists for you all. That'll be available on our website. We are launching all of this material. It should be available and ready for use at the end of this week. So we've been doing a lot of work on the back end to get that up and running. And of course, as time goes on, as we get closer to 2026, we'll be working with your jurisdictions and multiple folks across the state to utilize those tools as effectively as possible. So when we send out our the recordings of these and the slide decks and all of that stuff, we'll be sure to link to our website where all that's located.
I also put in the chat, just in case anyone missed it too, our guidelines. It is a long document. I pulled out the checklist. So there is a document with all our checklists. And then there's an optional template spreadsheet you can use. You don't have to use. But they are all still a work in progress.
And then, as Becky mentioned, we do have example supporting documents that will be helpful for you all as well.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this off now to Jen to talk about the submission package.
All right, you guys have been asking some fantastic questions today that really help all of us understand what the needs are of the local jurisdictions. But kind of moving on, what would go into that submission package that we've been building up to? You'll need to include a unit count summary. You'll need to include project and ownership information. So project name and location, type of dwelling, ownership or rental classification so that we can assure that they're meeting the thresholds. Affordability compliance, so that would be your affordability mechanism unless it's NOAA. Supporting documentation, so in new construction, that would be that building permit or verification of construction. For preservation and conversion, excuse me, and expiring affordability document, financial close or rehabilitation plan. So some documentation that shows that that has been preserved or converted. And then in NOAA, the data document demonstrating affordability. As we've been talking about today, that's probably the loosest one still, but we're still trying to provide some guidance on what that could be. And then any funding and collaboration. So if you've used Proposition 123 funding, you would need to include documentation of that and any other committed funding sources. I do want to highlight that the DOH team has been developing a database to input your submission package information into. So putting it all together, we have our unit count summary, our affordability, compliance, our funding and collaboration that all go into that submission package. Only authorized officials of the governing body are able to submit that unit counting package. And we recommend that you maintain and submit your documentation as you go through your 3-year cycle. Filing early is always encouraged. As we all know, there's going to be a bit of a kind of a jumble up at the end of the year. So you'll be filing your next commitment for the next cycle in November, and then the unit count verification is due by the end of the year of that same year. So that's why we just really recommend don't wait. Try to get those unit counts in as early as possible or as they're available. We do have some additional resources. As we stated earlier in the meeting, at the very beginning of the meeting, here's your community support team, Ashley, Dean, Becky, and Andrew. We'll pop their contact information into the chat so it's readily available. And don't ever forget about Robin at the Division of Local Government. So she's obviously a fantastic resource as well. So we'll pop these again into the chat for you all. And just one last reminder, like we were talking about, it's a cycle, right? So we have these 3-year cycles. You establish your baseline, you file your commitment, you can start tracking your units at that point. Hopefully you all, after this first 3-year cycle, working out all the kinks, will have a good system moving forward. Don't forget about getting your expedited review implemented. Then you, at the end of the cycle, will reset your baseline and commitments and verify your unit count, and then start all over for the next cycle. So as we've said before, it's just these continuous 3-year cycles. Again, here's some additional resources. We've got the DOLA Prop 123 homepage, the compliance information website, and some FAQ documents. So with that, I'm going to open to question. I've seen that a bunch of comments coming into the chat. So we'll kind of read through some of the chat and just hold your hand up if you have a specific question, and we'll just get through them. We can stay on for another half hour if needed. So.
I think I've addressed the chat question for now, but if I missed anyone, feel free to chime in.
I have another question. This is Catherine in Denver, and I also can't find the raise your hand thing, sorry. So would an example of a NOAA ownership unit be an existing unit with no deed restrictions that sold to at a price that's affordable to a household with less than 100% AMI?
It's sort of a hard one to prove, but if there was a way to show that it wasn't occupied at that price and then it became occupied at the price, so it's going into your affordable stock. But that's a tricky one. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that.
Oh, because it might have been counted in our baseline.
It might have been counted in your baseline, right? And that's another one that's hard because the baseline was most people used American Community Survey, and you didn't see the specific units that were included in it. It was sort of a community-wide number. But with the NOAA units, any kind of process or documentation you can provide to sort of help lay that out, that'd be hugely helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think Catherine, maybe an example would be a new unit. You know that it's new construction that was sold at an affordable price. And then you can look at the MLS at the end of the cycle and say, hey, it hasn't been resold. That's a great example right there.
Yeah, we've been doing that. Like we've been looking at, although I was not prepared to look at the prices at the end of the cycle. And that's going to be a big challenge, just so you guys know, because we don't know like how close we are to meeting our target until the very end. So I definitely ask you guys to rethink that. We've been looking at new units that sell at an affordable price and then just going and looking up the building permit date. So that part's doable. I just wasn't sure about the existing units, but it seems like it's logical to assume they were already counted in the baseline. So thank you so much for the answers.
Kind of a good question here from Ray about a NOAA previously naturally occurring affordable trying to purchase and preserve and then deed restrict those units. And I think Ray's question is asking about whether Prop 123 funding resources are available for that. And I think the answer is yes, potentially. You could, if it's rental, you would probably want to be looking at CHAFA for funding. If it's home ownership, like maybe condos, you would probably want to look at Division of Housing for funding. But there may be other non-Prop 123 funding resources that could help with that kind of preservation and acquisition project. The thing to also keep in mind is that sometimes an older building like this may need substantial repairs. And when those building upgrades happen with a market rate developer, often the rent ends up going up, right? So sometimes that subsidy to do the renovations and acquire that building really make it possible to preserve those units. And that's a valiant effort that we want to see more of, right? And that's partly why they also count. But Ray, if your question was different, please jump in and clarify.
Thank you, Robin. That was exactly what I was seeking to get understood. I can follow up offline here because it's a path we are exploring very rapidly on a number of projects. So I'll have a few follow-up questions I can send out to the support team here kind of directly, mostly concerned around timing of this, because as you know, with acquisitions, sometimes they need to move a little bit quicker than perhaps what's available from some of these resources. But thank you.
Just along those lines, something I always like to encourage, obviously the Prop 123 community support team are a great asset, but also your Division of Housing regional development specialist is going to be a good person to talk to about funding opportunities. Over on the OEDIT and CHAFA side of funding opportunities, they also have regional contacts, and get to know those contacts because they'll be able to really help you get into the details of what funding's available, what's the best fit for the project you're trying to pursue.
I do have a question about ADUs. So we have a production program, ADUs. Do we count at the building permit with the homeowner, or do we count at that it becomes a rental with the tenant?
I'm not sure that I have specific clarity on that. if you counted the building permit and it does not have someone that is paying above 60% AMI to rent in it in between that time, if it's going directly into the affordable stock, then I would think it would be counted at building permit.
So we would use the 100% AMI for the homeowner, who's the developer in this case. This is where it gets tricky. It's the homeowner who's the developer. So it would be based on their income, is what I'm hearing you say?
Is it gonna be a rental or an ownership unit?
It would be a rental,
Okay.
but it's naturally occurring. So this is the other, it would be probably naturally occurring, but there's no affordability mechanism other than my agreement with them as a city. So it's a city funded project.
So one thought that a local government can consider is various strategies that would ensure that that unit counts towards your commitment. So a local government would be able to set up kind of an incentive program. If you want to incentivize those property owners to add a new ADU, you might say that that rental unit needs to be affordable to a household up to 60% AMI for a period of time. And with that agreement with the homeowner, that would ensure that you can count it towards your commitment. Some of the financing programs that will be available through Prop 123 or through other things like the new ADU bill 1152 might come with some of those requirements if that homeowner were to take advantage of that funding. But those are just some thoughts that at the local level, you could set up some kind of incentive program with those agreements built in.
Okay, so second question to that is, if the homeowner is intending to live in the ADU and use their primary building as their rental, as this is pretty common where we're at. So they're the owner of the ADU, they're the one living there. They're not charging rent because they're the owner. But then their primary structure could potentially be another unit, maybe preserved because it now becomes a rental on the market. So that one would only count if it's at 60% AMI, but how would we count the ADU then?
I think actually you've got my head going in circles with you. I think that maybe putting this into some specific scenario and reaching out to the community support team would be helpful. Give everyone a little chance to see how all these components fit together. Does anyone else have thoughts at the moment?
No, I was just gonna say, Ashley, we look forward to delving a little bit deeper into that situation with you.
Perfect. I've got lots, so.
Keeping us on our toes, that's good.
And as we've mentioned, you know, the guidelines that we have out right now are still in somewhat of a draft form. So we are all still, you know, accepting feedback and learning together to some extent. And there is a feedback form on the compliance information page if you have thoughts around the current draft of the guidelines.
Are there any more questions or comments for discussion? Okay. Well, with that, we definitely thank you all for participating in our webinar today. I think we've shared a whole list of resources, the guidelines document, the feedback form that Becky just dropped in the chat, along with some contact information. So keep up the good work, keep bringing in that affordable housing, and yeah, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining.